Welcome to the Book Fair podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have a look at an upcoming nonfiction series from Scholastic. PEN America's annual report shows an increase in writers being detained and imprisoned, and how LGBTQ+ stories and authors are feeling pressure within the publishing industry. Coming this Friday, we will have an interview with Maggie Edkins Willis, author and illustrator of Little Ghost Makes a Friend and its recent sequel, Little Ghost's Summerween. Let's begin this week with a look at some new titles, starting with We Are Joy by Chrystal D. Giles and illustrated by Kitt Thomas. Teaming up with Thomas, middle grade author Giles makes her picture book debut with this dynamic celebration of Black joy viewed through the lens of community and culture. Anchored by variations on eponymous refrain, bright text introduces cherished everyday moments. We are joy wrapped in tight auntie hugs and uncle's secret handshake in Nona's hand-stitched blanket. Bustling digital illustrations with shape-peppered backgrounds depict group scenes of brown-skinned children playing, gathering to eat cornbread dressing and sweet potato pie, taking part in academics, reading with an elder, and more. Conceptual spreads that visualize protest against injustice underscore joy as both inheritance and act of resistance. Incorporating references to collective memory and intergenerational connection, this uplifting tribute to ancestry, advocacy, and aspiration aptly meditates on the sustaining power of joy. We are joy ready, exactly like we are. Background characters are portrayed with various skin tones, and this book is recommended for ages 4 to 8. Next is The Island at the Edge of Night by Lucy Strange. In this haunting speculative novel, Strange whisks readers to windswept Auk Island School, where tween Faye Fitzgerald is unceremoniously enrolled after a storm leaves her aunt gravely injured and unable to care for both Faye and her ill father. The forbidding academy, perched off the Scottish coast, proves as inhospitable as the sea that surrounds it. Headmaster Dr. Leiter and his wife, steely nurse Violet, are unnerved at Faye's different-colored eyes, a condition called heterochromia. And the year opens with the students attending a classmate's funeral, which unsettles Faye. Even amid the gloom, Faye, long accustomed to isolation, befriends classmates Boudica Braithwaite and Prince Filiberto. Together, the trio, labeled wicked by the faculty for their curious nature, begin to suspect that the island's moors conceal more than secrets. Rhythmic prose tantalizingly seeds hints of magic through the stark landscape, building an atmosphere that is simultaneously chilling and alluring. Helmed by a heroine whose quiet fortitude deepens into hard-won courage, it's an evocative gothic horror tale in which friendship becomes both weapon and shield. Boudica has brown skin, other characters cue as white, and this book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next is Midsummer Sisters by Niki Smith. A blended family grapples with shifting relationships throughout an expertly crafted and emotionally perceptive graphic novel by Smith. Kenzie, an avid rock collector with a prominent facial birthmark, and Quinn, a quick-tempered redhead whose favorite pastime is texting her crush, have been stepsisters for years, ever since Kenzie's mother died and their single parents found each other. When that relationship begins to splinter, the girls are sent to their grandmother's home on North Carolina's Outer Banks for a summer marred by uncertainty. Against a backdrop of sand dunes and roaming wild horses, Kenzie and Quinn process the looming possibility of separation in sharply contrasting ways. Kenzie turns inward with preemptive grief, while Quinn's emotions manifest in angry outbursts. With care and nuance, graceful linework captures both the grandeur of the windswept coastline and the intimacy of strained glances and interrupted conversations. The dialogue feels natural and subtle, allowing readers to read between the lines and come to their own conclusions as the narrative unfolds. The arrival of a literal storm underscores the pale-skinned siblings' emotional turbulence, while steady grandma provides a refuge where the sisters' bond can hold fast. This insightful exploration of change will resonate with nature lovers and readers weathering upheaval of their own. This book is recommended for ages 9 to 12. Next is The League of Dangerous Young Ladies by J.A. Morgenstein. The daughters of classic literary characters and historical figures embark on high-octane fantasy adventures in Morgenstein's spirited debut. In 1909, Rose Moriarty, the teenage daughter of Sherlock Holmes's infamous rival, is best known as a mystery-solving, monster-slaying ingenue. Feeling adrift after a mission gone south, she wanders the grounds of her former headmistress Hina's unconventional London Academy, a school that prioritizes world-saving exploits over decorum. Separated by her formidable companions, including brilliant inventor Niki Tesla and physically enhanced Sephi Moreau, Rose must navigate both external dangers and internal doubts. The arrival of enigmatic Count Chrystal of the Carpathian Mountains and his aide Clara draws Rose into a perilous search for a powerful magic orb, which is upended by the emergence of eerie, magical, altered insect-like beings and the devastating revelation of Niki's declining health. The novel's emphasis on women in scientific and intellectual pursuits contending with interpersonal challenges is rendered with refreshing candor. Its strength lies in the nuanced characterizations of the white-cued cast. Sephi's combination of enhanced strength and social unease adds emotional texture to the group dynamic. Blending homage with reinvention, this unique and emotionally grounded series launch will leave readers eager for further installments. This book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Next is Where You'll Find Us by Jen St. Jude. St. Jude dazzles with a layered, cathartic story about a transgender teen's discovery of a magical, liminal space that empowers them to be their most authentic self. Indiana-born Cal feels trapped in their body. After drunkenly confessing, "I don't think I'm a girl," to their girlfriend Ramona, who balks at the idea of dating a trans guy, Cal longs for more time to figure themselves out, to change Ramona's mind, and to stall their seemingly inevitable breakup. Soon, Cal and Ramona stumble upon an isolated farmhouse sheltering 5 queer strangers. Time doesn't pass in this refuge, called Amaranth, and some of the teens have been living there for decades. Cal believes they found the perfect place to be themselves, until Amaranth's stopped clocks suddenly start ticking, forcing the group to reckon with the pasts they've been avoiding and return to the outside world. Intimate and graceful pose renders Cal's first-person narration punctuated by intermittent sections that chronicle the personal histories of Amaranth's residents, deftly portraying multiple facets of queer identity. As Cal reflects on their relationship with time, they learn that while its passing can incite feelings of overwhelm, it can also be a gift, one that brings opportunities to heal, transform, and move on. Cal reads as white, supporting characters are intersectionally diverse, and this book is recommended for ages 14 and up. The final title to look at this week is Bad Queer by Gayathiri Kamalakanthan and illustrated by Chi Nuosu. Kamalakanthan debuts with a scintillating verse novel that chronicles a non-binary teen's journey toward publicly claiming their queer identity. Whenever they're misgendered, Sri Lankan British 17-year-old Surya freezes, fearful of correcting the misunderstanding. Though Surya's cis female mom and gender-fluid artist Amma surround the teen with love at home, Surya longs to foster both platonic and romantic connections with others. When Surya joins an after-school theater program, they confront their fear of being perceived and experience their first crush. The more involved Surya becomes with the theater group, the harder it becomes for them to suppress their true self, despite the troupe's sometimes transphobic rhetoric. Sedate pacing is paired with intense lines that often land with the force of a gut punch. Nuosu's captivating illustrations, peppered throughout, capture each instance of love and uncertainty in deceptively simple black and white line art. This poetic slice-of-life portrait is not to be missed. This book is recommended for ages 14 and up. That covers the new releases for this week. Next, we'll be taking a look at some news. But first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Fair podcast, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, or follow wherever you are currently listening to help push the show out to new listeners. Second, you can follow the podcast on Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok at Book Fair Pod. You can also go to patreon.com/thebookfair to find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. Following on Patreon is free, and there are no posts hidden behind a paywall. Of course, the best way to help the Book Fair podcast is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Next, let's take a look at some news, starting with PEN America's report on writers being detained across the world. As part of PEN America's annual reporting, they look at how writers are being targeted in different parts of the world. In 2025, PEN America found 400 writers in prison or temporarily detained, marking a 68% increase since the first time the index was made in 2019. Reading from the introduction to the report, quote, "A growing number of countries, from autocratic and authoritarian regimes to ostensibly democratic societies with long-held traditions of open discourse, are clamping down on free expression, literature, art, and any form of dissent." End quote. This increase is reflected by the United States, appearing in the report for the first time. Before we get into the data presented, let's begin by clarifying what this report is looking at. Here on the Book Fair podcast, we largely discuss fiction authors. There are novelists who are included in this report, but for the most part, the term writers in the context of PEN America's report includes journalists, reporters, and advocates posting to social media, primarily for print news agencies. The largest profession designated in PEN America's report is online commentator, making up 212 of the 400 writers detained in 2025, followed by journalists at 142, literary writers at 130, activists at 83, scholars at 81, and poets at 73. These numbers add up over the 400 number given because there is some overlap between them. The 10 countries leading the report are China, with 119 people jailed in 2025, followed by Iran with 53, Saudi Arabia with 27, Vietnam with 24, Turkey with 22, Israel with 21, including occupied Palestinian territory, Russia with 18, Belarus with 17, Egypt with 13, and Myanmar with 10. PEN America's report breaks down significant cases as well as writers who were at risk of imprisonment. But for now, I want to cover the specific cases that happened in the United States. If you'd like to read more on this topic, links as always can be found at patreon.com/thebookfair. In October 2025, the United States made history, landing itself on PEN America's Freedom to Write Index, when British journalist Sami Hamdi was detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Hamdi is an outspoken critic of Israel and in 2025 was on a speaking tour within the United States. ICE detained Hamdi at the behest of the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security, at the time under the charge of Kristi Noem. DHS alleged that Hamdi was in support of terrorism and posed a threat to national security. Hamdi had his visa revoked after writings and publicly denouncing Israel's ongoing conflict in Gaza, along with America's involvement. After 2 weeks in custody, Sami Hamdi was released and returned to the UK, considered a voluntary departure instead of deportation. A second writer is mentioned in the report but not included in the index due to being detained for less than 48 hours. Alastair Kitchen, a former graduate at Columbia University, was interrogated and deported to Melbourne during a layover at Los Angeles International Airport. In an interview with The Guardian, Kitchen stated that officers, quote, explicitly said to me, the reason you have been detained is because of your writing on the Columbia student protest, end quote. ICE, under the direction of Donald Trump, had targeted people based on their published or social media writings that are critical of the government. There is a terrifying precedent being set in this report, and with nearly a year before PEN America's next annual report, we can only wait to see if the attack on free speech continued after those that happened at the end of 2025. Our next story comes from an op-ed posted to bookriot.com. Censorship has been on the rise in recent years, and with state and federal legislation targeting specific language in schools and libraries, it isn't stopping anytime soon. There is an effect from this on how books are published based on book bans, challenges, and legislation. Small publishers that primarily focus on diverse titles have seen a drop in sales to libraries and schools. According to Jason Lowe, co-owner of Lee and Lowe Books, quote, our salespeople have told us that books that feature a rainbow on the cover, even if the rainbow has nothing to do with a pride flag, are being omitted from orders, end quote. This is a direct response to laws targeting LGBTQ+ books in libraries. Even authors are seeing these adverse effects. Children's and YA authors have seen fewer bookings for school events and public speaking. Adib Khorram, writer of queer YA novels, openly reported a 70% drop in royalties during this rise in book bans. Authors and editors also describe self-censoring, intentionally writing or editing fewer queer-focused books in anticipation of them being challenged. Wholesalers, distributors who purchase books from publishers to sell to libraries and bookstores, are shying away from LGBTQ+ content. This all is to say that with book bans increasing, we are seeing a systematic, top-down initiative to deprioritize telling stories that feature LGBTQ+ themes and characters. It's important to remember that representation matters. Diverse books serve a purpose in our society, especially those written for young readers. Everyone deserves to see themselves reflected in media. Diverse representation in books also teaches acceptance and creating a hostile environment where the publishing industry itself is forced to respond in this way leads to fewer people being able to see their lives and experiences reflected in the stories they read. Next, a brief look at two bills making their way through the New Hampshire state legislature. House Bill 434 requires school districts to develop a procedure to determine if material should be removed from a school based on individual objection. Opponents of the bill said school districts currently have policies in place to decide complaints concerning materials used in public schools, and the proposal would simply allow a single complaint to cause materials to be removed from schools without public comment or transparency. House Bill 434 passed the House with a vote of 188 to 161 and will now move on to the Senate. A second proposed bill, SB 430, recently went through the House and mirrors similar forced outing bills. It differs slightly, requiring teachers and school staff to respond to requests from parents and guardians pertaining to information about their students. However, it is similar to HB 2616 in that it does work as a forced outing bill. Now, for some of what we can consider good news this week. Starting with a new nonfiction series from Scholastic. With 62 million copies in print, the appeal of the I Survived series is indisputable. Lauren Tarshi's, author of the I Survived series, is expanding next spring into a new nonfiction spin-off of the wildly popular series. The books will be part of a new series called True Survivors. The first two titles, releasing simultaneously on April 6, 2027, are America's Deadliest Tornado, The Tri-State Tornado, 1925, and The Volcano That Changed the World, The Eruption of Mount Tambora, 1815. A third title, Escaping Hitler, Shanghai, China, 1939, is set for a summer 2027 release, and a fourth untitled release for fall of 2027. The new True Survivors nonfiction titles will feature a shorter word count than the original series. The goal for this spin-off is to reach even more kinds of readers, with Lauren Tarshi's saying, quote, "It's not enough to just engage kids with a cool cover and an inherently interesting topic. So many readers today struggle or lack reading stamina, or have attention spans shaped by their screen time. So I'm always thinking of how to keep kids reading, how to prevent them from getting confused or bored or lost. Because if they don't get to the end of the book, I haven't done my job." End quote. And now our final story for the week. A librarian who makes a difference in her community. Cassie Owens Moore was a teacher in Seneca, South Carolina at Seneca Middle School, who would frequently lend students books from her personal collection. After 18 years of teaching, Owens Moore became a librarian at the school that she taught at when the position came up, as her college program was ending. Cassie Owens Moore didn't remember seeing books that reflected her. The ones she did find included stories of people who were enslaved, in a gang, or focused on the adversities of living in a single-parent home. Quote, "I would read that and I was like, this isn't my story. And it really wasn't a lot of people's story. It was always something traumatic, and that was very disheartening to me." End quote. Owens Moore sees herself as a representational librarian whose job is to help every student see themselves as a reader. If they ask for a book, she finds it. Owens Moore recalls a transgender student, saying, quote, "He called me out and said, 'Miss Moore, I don't see any books about trans kids. Do you have any?' And I said, 'Oh my, I am so sorry, you are absolutely right. I do not have any, but I will fix that." End quote. Owens Moore researched, reading and buying 4 books for the collection. When the student returned their book, he gave her a hug. These kinds of stories and the work Owens Moore is doing are difficult in places like South Carolina. She stands her ground, sometimes being at odds with school leadership. Administrators in meetings had suggested certain books shouldn't be available at school, and that if students want to read them, they can just go to a public library. Of course, not every child has access to public libraries. Owens Moore publicly opposed this, saying, quote, "That's why I'm in the school building, because I need to be able to provide books for everybody in my school." I had all these people stop by and say, "Oh, I love what you said." And I was like, "Why didn't you say something too?" End quote. Owens Moore and her work at Seneca Middle School have received state recognition. In 2024, the South Carolina General Assembly recognized her for the inclusive and engaging programs she created, including Book Joy, where students would recommend their favorite books to classmates. In the same year, the South Carolina Association of School Librarians selected the Seneca Middle School Library as the state's Outstanding Library of the Year. And this spring, the same association named Cassie Owens Moore the South Carolina Librarian of the Year. Congratulations to Cassie Owens Moore. And thank you for your dedication. You are the reason I continue to produce this podcast. Seeing people who genuinely care about helping young people learn to love reading and finding stories that reflect them. This will conclude another episode of the Book Fair podcast. Coming this Friday, we will have an interview with Maggie Edkins Willis, author and illustrator of Little Ghost's Summer Weed. If you'd like to stay up to date with the show, you can follow wherever you are currently listening or on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Book Fair Pod. If you'd like to help the Book Fair podcast grow, you can also go to patreon.com/thebookfair. Following on Patreon is free, and there are no posts hidden behind a paywall. You can find links to news sources as well as episodes posted early. Simply add the Patreon RSS feed to your preferred podcast platform. Of course, the best way to help the Book Fair podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.